colleagues, I will start by introducing myself. I'm Tatiana Bielek. Today, I'm representing the family center Dotyk, meaning touch. I'm the co-founder and member of the board, and I will be discussing the transition, or rather the creation of the center. And it's going to be about how we set up. It all started 18 years ago, and for 18 years we've been evolving family mediation in Ukraine. And over this time, we've created a number of organizations that I have co-founded with my colleagues. So I will start by saying how we came to the idea of creating a family center Dotyk as a multidisciplinary approach to dealing with family conflict. The event we're holding today is a first international conference dedicated to this topic, followed by a few more. Today we will discuss the British and Australian systems, followed by other countries who have a similar system of supporting families as a multidisciplinary team, ensuring family interaction with the contact centers, with the involvement of mediators, as is done in Ukraine. Since several organizations were established over the 18 years of our practice, each of them sought to reach its own goals. We will represent the research and achievements of the Family Center, Dotyk. Prior to that, we conducted studies through a joint project which was initiated concurrently with the full-scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine. I would like to thank the organizations Peace Nexus Foundation and Robert Bosch Fund for supporting the Family Center Dotyk and for funding the project. I would like to begin by mentioning the project that we had called Family Mediation for the period of war. It operated from 22 to 24. This is when the project operated. It was implemented jointly by the Mediation School, the League of Ukrainian Mediators, and the Association of Family Mediators of Ukraine. This project sought to support the family mediation practice, which seemed very challenging for us as the requests for family mediation were changing quite drastically. We also required the support of the international community because we needed more knowledge and better understanding of how do we handle family conflict in a war context. And many Ukrainian families were affected by the full-scale invasion, really needed the support. And this is when we initiated and implemented the project, Family Mediation at War. During the first year, we spanned 50 mediators across Ukraine. In the second year, we lost a few mediators. We brought in mediators from organizations and a few others who donated their time and effort to support the Ukrainian families. The key objective of the project was to continue supporting the families so that we could retain what we had been building for 18 years and offer support to the families and also learn from the best international practices. Over this time, we have handled 455 cases, considering we had 35 mediators on average over 2 years. It will mean a very significant caseload on the mediators. The project was pro bono. All the Ukrainian families received family mediation service for free. We had offered the services to 1,355 families, and out of the total number of cases, 288 cases involved children. So this is the work conducted jointly by the family mediators in Ukraine. At the time, some mediators had also had to leave the country due to occupation, due to evacuation from the areas of hostilities, but nevertheless continued engaging with us online. The key challenges we had faced had to do with the high intensity emotional workload on mediators because of the trauma affecting the family conflict, and also the family conflict intensified the trauma that the Ukrainian families had already sustained. Also, the mediators themselves are located and continue to be subjected to high level stress, as today we are still living in a country that is at war. The war is ongoing and the stress level is not getting any lesser. We are facing drone and missile attacks day by day, and the stress remains quite high. So we have come to understand that we need to evolve our practice, considering the impact that trauma is having on the course of the family conflict. Being aware of that, and also being aware of the need to ensure our professional development to be capable to deliver the services to the family needing it, considering the context we were in, and that is frequent blackouts, unstable internet, etc. All that had a bearing on the way we could perform. There were times when we could only deliver our services via a phone service where we could hear the parties but not be able to see them. When one of the parties is serving in the area of hostilities, when one of the parties is a serviceman in the army, that also had a bearing on the way we could mediate. The number of cross-border cases is also building because 15 million Ukrainians had to flee the country. Some people had returned, but still a vast number of families are separated by distance, leading to the need to learn how to handle cross-border conflicts between the families. And all the challenges we had been facing made us see that we need to learn or build on best international practices. This is when we received unbelievable support from our colleagues. These are the 10 different courses we took during the first year. We had crisis mediation from Israeli colleagues. Our American colleagues had given us very robust support. The Institute of Reflective Practice with Michael Len had trained us. The Gary Friedman's Institute had given us courses in addition to the specific workshops. We had taken a practical course. We took 40 hours on integrative approaches in mediation. We had very strong support from the British community of mediators. Our steadfast friend, Lisa Parkinson, deserves our immense gratitude because she had trained us and accredited us in child family mediation, and had also given us supervisory support and intervisions, and we had engaged with other international experts. European, Norwegian colleagues had supported us with trainings, as well as Australian colleague Samantha Harking. So we learned as much as we can to see how the family mediators are applying trauma-informed approaches. In the end of the day, we could see that our context is unique, and it's unique not only for finding itself in the midst of war, and we could still say there are distinctions from our context, from the Israeli context, and even though Israel is also experiencing hostilities, but the family contexts are quite different. There are differences from the American colleagues, as well as the American servicemen who had taken part in combat would come back home, and that would affect the families. But our context is quite different. So we had to shape a different approach to family mediation. We had coded trauma-informed approach to family mediation, and now we can say that the Ukrainian families had experienced a loss one way or another. So this is not an option. It is a necessity now, when we need to consider the effect trauma is having on the family conflict. And the family mediators have to be fully aware and informed of the trauma. Having done the study over the 2 years of project implementation, having taken those trainings, we had come to see that we are facing a novel problem, and it is that we couldn't deal with the family in isolation from other services, because there are solicitors, there are psychologists, and they too try to deliver their services. But often that affected the mediation, as dealing with the family system, understanding that additional support was needed either for the parents or for the child. By delivering the service, we could see that the parents' level of argument only escalated as the professionals would say that the argument, that the conflict between the parents could affect the well-being of the child. So thinking they would need to isolate the child from the parent. Being aware that we need to use a multidisciplinary approach, bringing the different professionals together, we came out with the idea of setting up a child contact center, Dotyk, the touch. We are all practicing family mediators. Some of us bring our background in psychology as family counselors, as child psychologists, as social workers, as solicitors, lawyers, of other professionals who work with the families in their different capacities. So we brought a team together of practicing family mediators, and this project seeks to create an ecosystem with the family at its core. We assign a case manager who diagnoses a conflict and identifies the additional support the family may need to make it capable of starting the mediation procedure and dealing with the conflict based on the unique features of this family. So all the team members follow the mediation approaches. We say that the family is at the core and we are seeking to meet the best interests of the child. And we work from there to support the family. So the family center, Dotyk, will be presented later on. Today, we will present the operation of the family center, Dotyk, and the challenges we are seeing currently, and what do we need to do to make sure we could help the families deal with family conflicts. The goal we have set up for ourselves prior to starting the international workshops, prior to learning the different international practices, studying the operation of child contact centers, was to see the best international practices, but also building on the expertise that we had garnered so that we could adapt the best practices to the specific context. And the expertise we have had to build over the 4 years of the engagement with the families since the start of the full-scale conflict. So we seek to build our expertise by sharing the practices with our international colleagues. I will wrap up now. As I see I have used up my time, my colleagues from the Family Center will also share more information about the research we've done, about the Ukrainian experience. And prior to giving the floor to Elizabeth, I would ask Tetiana Sirik, who is the acting director of the Mediators League of Ukraine. So we continue engaging, and many mediators who have joined our practice come from the Mediators League. This cooperation is critical for us. So, Tatiana, would you say just a couple of words first? Thank you, Tatiana. I'm very happy to take part in this great company. I'm Tatiana Sirik. I represent a civil society organization, the League of Ukrainian Mediators. We were founded in December 2017 to promote and evolve family mediation as a peaceful and amicable settlement of family disputes. We are actively engaging with governmental and social institutions. We have 19 agreements with the child custody centers and social services. The League serves as an umbrella for the family mediators, shaping our profession in Ukraine. We deliver family mediation services, we conduct training events for the mediators, for social services, for civil society organizations, for the governmental institutions, and we seek to build a professional community of family mediators. Families seek support from us during divorce proceedings, during conflict between parents and children, for inheritance disputes, for adoption. We handle cases and we seek systemic change. Our partners and us are actively advocating the practice of information session with the mediators on the rights of a child. We actively monitor the rights of a child in cooperation with the Ombudsman of Ukraine. We are building the competencies of family mediators, judicial mediators. We have joined a coalition in order to promote mediation in Ukraine. We know that mediation isn't just a way to resolve conflict, but to maintain dialogue in the family in the best interests of a child. Thank you for giving me your attention. I'm really looking forward to this event and handing the floor back. Thank you, Tatiana. So now we can transition to the introduction to the British system of contact centers. I would like to introduce and thank the British counterparts for the cooperation, for having signed the MOU. This is the first country that will be introducing the practice of child contact centers. So I would like to introduce Elizabeth Cole, who is the General Director of the National Association of Child Contact Centers of the United Kingdom. Elizabeth started her career as the probation inspector, transitioning to the family court as the social welfare inspector. It's important to note that Elizabeth is also a professional mediator herself and a consultant for post-traumatic stress disorder. Before joining the National Association of Child Contact Centers, Elizabeth led CAS and managed its operation in London. Elizabeth is joined by Philip Coleman, who will be sharing insights into the British system. Philip joined the National Association of Child Contact Centers in 2013 and starting 2018 has been managing the development of services. And Philip is responsible for upholding the standards and implementing policies for the National Association. He's a social work expert. He graduated from Staffordshire University and is a practicing educator and specializes in child development. we are most grateful for your support and a chance to learn from the British system. So, Elizabeth, Philip, over to you. We're very keen to hear about your practices. So,
Okay. Thank you very much, Tanya, for
дякую,
inviting us.
Тетяно, за те, що нас запросили.
Philip is just going to put up my slides because I'm not familiar with Zoom, but he'll be just doing that. It'll only take us a few seconds. Meanwhile, I'll just tell you about a couple of things that we're going to put onto the chat box for you. NAC has considerable resources available for parents and children, professionals, and this includes the parenting plan and also the judicial protocol. We have an arrangement with the judiciary so that they cannot use any contact centres that are not accredited by NAC. So that is going to go as a link in the chat. In addition to that, I'm a member of the Family Solutions Group, multidisciplinary group of experts, including lawyers, mediators, therapists, social workers, and academics, kind of with a lot of experience of working with separating families and working on advocating for the rights of children in family separation. And that group have done a lot of reports, and we're putting a link into the Family Solutions group in the chat. The first report is called What About Me, and it sets out systems to restore child welfare and children's voices. And one of the things that you all know, and I know, is that parents make arrangements that aren't necessarily in the interest of children, and we're trying to ensure that children's rights are upheld. So that report sets out a lot of information in there. The next report was called Language Matters, and this uses the use of that words shape our mindset and what in turn affects how we think and feel. Looks at words that are harmful to family relationships, a very important paper. The third report is called What About Me? And this report reframes support for families following family separation. And the president of the family division, who's the top family judge in England, said, this report brings together the various lines of thinking to achieve good co-parenting. The fourth report, which isn't on the Family Solutions group yet, but is also equally a very important report, is called Putting Children First. And this explores the role of family law practitioners, how it is evolving, and it recommends ensuring child welfare and voices remain central. All of these reports are worth reading. And I would just say to you, you're very, very welcome to use those resources, and certainly all the resources that NAC has on their website. In addition to that, you will see a contact.org.uk link, and that is an opportunity. If anybody here wants to talk to any of us at any time, you can contact us on that email address and we will respond if you've got any questions following this. So I will proceed. Child contact centres in England started in 1889, so we go back quite a long way. It's always an evolving service. We learn new practices all of the time. Things change all of the time because legislation in government legislation changes. So we are constantly having to adapt. And we are responsible for 300 contact centres throughout Wales and Northern Ireland. So the purpose of contact centres is that they're safe and neutral places for children and parents to meet. We hope to reduce conflict and support safe contact, and also to help families move towards independent arrangements when they feel able, but for them to take forever to do that, because children don't want to be in contact centres forever. They want to be doing natural things like out playing football with the parents. There are a number of different types of contact. We have supervised contact arrangements. This is high oversight and safety focused. This is for families where risk is an issue, whether it's domestic abuse, alcohol misuse, mental health issues, or hasn't seen a child for a long time, so there needs to be some introductory work for the child. So that's in a supervised context, and usually that is supervised by qualified social workers. Then the next type of contact is supported. This is a much lighter touch, no detailed reporting, is usually done by volunteers, is often a free or very inexpensive service, and is run by independent organisations or whatever, but they are supported contact and they take low risk or no risk cases because they're not expected to report and they're not expected to face people who may be abusive or difficult. So that's the supported. So we have another that I haven't put here, but is actually something called community contact. And we developed community contact because we have some rural areas in England or in the UK wouldn't promote or wouldn't sustain a full contact centre service. So we now have individual social workers who will go out to rural areas to try and ensure that children in those areas can still have contact with the parent. Because what we do know, and research tells us, that the best outcomes for children is when they've had the loving experience with parents. So most contact centres do charge, as I say, and costs vary significantly. So if you're a supervised contact centre, and it's usually social workers, there is a cost because that's their full-time job, and they obviously are doing it as a job of work. The supported centres, as I say, are often free or very expensive because they're often in church halls. There's no great deal of observation in there. They're usually in a hall with other families, and it's a sort of casual arrangement, a much lighter touch arrangement. The government provides small grants to some of the contact centres, but they then either have to try and get funding externally from their centres, from other organisations in their area, or, as I said earlier, they may make a small charge to some parents. It would depend on hardship, but that is only in supported centres. Regardless, supervised centres will have to charge for full-time work. And as I've said earlier, contact centres have existed since 1989. And were actually started in Nottingham, which is where our office is, by a magistrate who, trying to make arrangements for parents in court, felt that parents had nowhere to go, and wanted to find some sort of alternative, and started contact centres. Families access centres through court referrals. Not all families do go to court. 38% of the people who come to our centres are self-referrals and never go to court, but some come through court referrals. Some through social services, some through solicitors, some are self-referred by parents. Mediators very rarely to date have done in terms of formal referrals, but what we do know is that mediators may say to a parent, we think you should go to a contact centre, but we don't have any statistics for that because they don't make a formal. So in terms of the UK model, there's national accreditation by NAC. And as I said previously about the judicial protocol, both judges and CAFCAS have to use NAC accredited centres, and they can find that on the NAC website. The centres pay a fee to NAC because we have limited government funding. We have a grant from the government, and that's topped up with membership. As I said, there's quite a large volunteer support network. We have about 4,000 volunteers and about 2,000 paid staff. We have very strong links with the family court, and I frequently go to court and talk to them about contact centres and introduce to them, because some of them don't always know, about the judicial protocol and how they should work with contact centres. And the judicial protocol is very clear about how the court should work with them. And services and they're part of the network. So they can be part of larger organisations like Barnardo's or Women's Union, or they may be small church organisations. So an overview of the process of making a referral to NAC is there'll be a referral and an assessment. All parents and children will be invited to have a pre-visit meeting after, so they can talk about the rules, etc. There will be a risk assessment, so that a sense, if they feel the risk is too great, I have to say to a parent or a referrer, this needs to go to a supervised centre, so the proper risk assessment has to be done. They'll schedule sessions. They will inform the parents when the sessions can start. And then they will have a review and look at progress. And the review is the point who will have had introduced at the pre-visit meeting a parenting plan to start thinking about how they may consider what they're going to do in the future. So, legal organisation and framework for the UK, a statutory basis is the Children Act from 1989, which has had a number of reviews, but local authorities promote contact between children in care. No statutory standards or regulations for children in private law. And we have found here that contact centre, anybody can open a contact centre. Although the courts and CAFCAS are not supposed to use centres that are not NAC accredited, we know that there are some that are practicing without accreditation, and we only hear about these when there's a complaint. It's not one of those. And we have gone to the government twice and put on government bills that they should mandate that all contact centres should be accredited. To date, we haven't been successful in changing that, but we are continuing to try. So I've already told you about the judicial protocol, which you'll find in the chat as a link. And there's been revised protocol, and that includes supervised contact and virtual contact, and some that the court can use instead of trying to handwrite things that don't work. Virtual contact was something we started during COVID, and a lot of centres now operate virtual contact because it is good when parents live a long distance away, because although we prefer them to have face-to-face contact with their children, the opportunity to at least maintain contact virtually is so beneficial for the child. It means that the child isn't losing contact with that parent and still around and still love them. So virtual contact is something that a lot of centres now provide, and is a means of dealing with people where they are not able to get to face-to-face. NAC has national standards, and members are accredited in accordance with the national standards and with the judicial protocol. National standards reviewed every 3 years, mainly by Phil. Phil does quite a lot of the review, and sometimes the review isn't huge, isn't a lot of it, but sometimes, depending if there's been changes in legislation, we may have to change the national standards. So they have to be reviewed every 3 years. NAC accreditation is voluntary, but is required by the courts, as I've said, and it provides national standards and inspection for the 300 centres that we have. And the 300 centres are a mixture of supported and supervised. I've already said that we've made attempts to reform in Parliament the accreditation bill to try and make accreditation, but it has not to date become law. We've already said that centres are run by independent organisations, charities, community groups, some for-profit organisations, but not that many of those, mainly non-for-profit or completely free or very small donations. CAFCAS only contacts NAC. So the organisational structure of child contact centres in the UK is the overview of the roles is governance and service delivery. So governance of contact centres is done by the board of trustees or directors. Then there's a senior management group, that's me, the CEO, and Phil, who's the service development manager. And we provide between us strategic leadership and safeguarding oversight. We do provide a safeguarding helpline 24 hours a day. If anybody has an issue about safeguarding, they can contact our helpline and somebody will assist them in terms of giving advice about a way forward. Although all centres need to have their on a poster that tells them who they can contact if they are concerned about safeguarding, but they can come to us for advice at any time. Are usually either service or centre managers. They sometimes have a deputy manager or called a lead practitioner. And day-to-day operations they deal with, and compliance. And they deal also with trying to get their accreditation through in terms of making sure that they've got policies and everything they are required to have under national standards. So the frontline staff of supported contact centres will have sessional coordinators and an administrator. They'll have trained volunteers, and we have 10 modules of training that all volunteers are expected to do every 3 years, but safeguarding training they have to do. And they have a referral management and they have facilitated sessions. So they open usually at weekends. The supported ones usually only work at weekends. Then the frontline staff at supervised contact, they have qualified practitioners and contact supervisors. They have some family support workers that also sit in with the social workers when they're doing observation and for reports, and they deal with safeguarding, supervision, and actually reporting to courts and doing reports for parents. So there are specialist roles within the organisational structure of centres. Some of them have safeguarding leads, some have mediators and counsellors and psychologists, and some have legal and policy support. We have, in the past couple of years or so, suggested that the centres become more of a service hub for families, so find out information, they can get help from mediators, etc., in the centres, and so they've got kind of one-stop stuff. Admin and support functions are they do case management and they do screening through their risk assessments. They schedule and coordinate cases, so they will say they have decisions to make about how frequently people can come to a centre, depending on what the parents actually want and are able to do. And they have funding support. So there is collaboration, and that's with the courts, social services, family agencies, like mediators, like family hubs. There are mental health and therapeutic services and some legal services like probation offices and probation services, because our families may already be in touch with all of these agencies, and to do proper risk assessments and to be able to help the families, it's important for us to know um, what people are coming to us, what help they might need, and what support they're already getting. So coordination with expert specialists, our mediators, family hubs, and parenting programs. More and more contact centres are providing programs for parents that are helping them not to learn how to be parents, but to learn how better to communicate with each other, to be able to make sure that they can manage the arrangements in the future from the centre. So our multi-agency collaboration is around monitoring outcomes. So it's important that we know from a mental health worker or a drugs worker how that person's doing on their with their sessions with them, and how that might help us when we're preparing to deal with the family and support the family. Families about how things are going, whether they're happy with the service, what different things we could do for them to help them and support them. We have professional development and accreditation. We have professional development from other multi-agencies, such as mediators, solicitors, etc., will support us if we need some advice. As I said about mandatory training, all people who are working in contact centres must do the training, and our accreditation asks what about the training plan, who's done what, and making an action plan if people haven't done the training that they need to do. I'm sorry I'm going quite quickly through this, but I have quite a list of things from Tanya to cover, so I'm not going too quickly. So access to services and case management, how cases reach a contact centre. An overview of the referral pathway to UK contact centres. Contact centres are considered a short stepping stone. We do not expect families to be at contact centres indefinitely. We like to try and help them through the parenting plan, their long-term arrangements, and try to help families to understand through the parenting plan that these children are children forever. So if they want to have any meaningful relationship and contact with the events in a child's life, they do really need at some stages to think about how they're going to be able to get along with each other. So we try to keep contact centre involvement for a limited amount of time. Now, sometimes there are exceptions when it has, but we try to help the parent to understand this is short term and we'd like you to think about the future for yourself. A court, if they're involved, may order a specific number of sessions. Again, that would be short term, and the judges may direct families to use either a supported or a supervised centre. And there are community pathways for supervised contact. So social services or local authority teams may make a referral. If a family is involved with family support workers, they also can refer. Mediation, as I say, can refer, solicitors and CAFCAS officers. So not all of the cases that come to contact centres come through the court by any means. So this is how they reach us. They come through self-referrals, and parents can apply directly to many supported centres, and used when communication, the supported centres are used when communication is difficult or contact has broken down. And sometimes it can be contact in the community can be going on very well, but then all of a sudden one of the partners gets a new partner, and that sets off a train of events where the person who with whom the child lives is unhappy about that. So if contact has broken down, the parents may come to a contact centre or want to self-refer. Children cannot self-refer to a contact centre. Our demographic would mean that that wouldn't happen anyway, because they're usually between 1 and 10 years old, so they wouldn't be in a position to do that. Multi-agency pathways are referrals through parenting programs, mediation, solicitors, CAFCAS, or through family support programs. Parents can make inquiries via helpline or community organisations. They can come straight through to NAC and ask about how they may make a referral, and they will be directed to the website where there's a drop-down box with find a centre. They can see what centres in their area and they can make their own referral. So as I've just earlier said, families may return if circumstances have changed, so they may do well at a contact centre, feel they're able to leave, but then have to come back because something's changed, like a new partner on the scene and somebody not being happy with their involvement. And it's useful when contact needs rebuilding again. So if there's been a break or there's been a disagreement and they've just stopped contact, it will help to rebuild all of that. So what happens at a referral? An initial inquiry, unless it's through the court, an initial inquiry can be made by phone or email. We ask that both parents do a referral form. We ask for both parents to do that because if one parent doesn't tell you something, the other parent definitely will. So it's important to try and get a referral form from both parents. The parents will have a pre-visit meeting to make an assessment about supported or supervised. And they would have to, if there's any risks associated with the case in the pre-visit, they may be asked to consider going to a supervised centre. Decisions on suitability and safety conditions will be made at that meeting. So interdisciplinary collaboration. There are collaboration between different specialists in service and takes both at NAC's level and with individual contact centres. Services involved are usually social services, mediation, solicitors, psychotherapists, drug services, domestic abuse services. So we have a lot of collaboration with all of those because make a decision about the suitability of whether it's supported or supervised. And meetings do take place to plan for contact at a centre going forward. So the parents will come to an agreement about what dates they'll come, at what times they will come. But contact centres are not specialists in different treatment programmes and work with them to ensure that whatever treatment is given to a parent makes it safe for children to be with them. So if a parent has alcohol problems or drug problems, they will have a discussion with the service to find out whether that parent is safe to be with children. So interdisciplinary collaboration. Often when a parent comes to a centre, specialists are already involved. Centres do not interfere with work done by other specialists, but do consider about how they can work together to ensure that the child is safe. It's unlikely a centre would refuse to work a case because of a different approach. They may try to understand why such an approach may be used and suggest that it may not be in the best interest of the child. But the child is their main concern. So sometimes they may have to make a decision that parent shouldn't have contact with that child, depending on what the issues are. But that's for discussion with the other specialist. So trying to restore contact when it breaks down during separation. Key factors contributing to the deterioration of parent-child contact may be high conflict. Child avoids contact when it's linked to tension or arguments. Children find this very difficult. It's almost like they'd rather not do it than get involved with parents who are arguing all the time or in high conflict. Very difficult for a child, and children, like the rest of us, prefer a peaceful life. It breaks down when there's no consistent routine, so unclear arrangements lead to it being confusing, that contacts are missed, that parents are arguing all the time. So that's how it can break down. Safety and well-being concerns, so domestic abuse, substance misuse, or an unstable environment can disrupt contact. Findings are made. So somebody may decide, a court may decide that the contact can take place, but if there are safety and well-being concerns, there has to be some sort of system put in place so that the child is safe or should not take place. We've got to be protecting children at all times. So restoring contact, if poor communication and misunderstandings and mistrust grow when parents can't communicate very well. Practical and financial barriers, so transport, distance, work patterns, or housing problems quite undermine regular contact. And one of the things that we found during the COVID pandemic and why we started virtual contact was that it's so important, even if parents aren't allowed to see the children face to face, how important that contact was to be able to see that parent, even on an iPad. It really made the child understand and realize that they were still loved and the parents still wanted to see them. And in situations like yours, where there may be distance between parents because of the war that's going on, then it may be one of the ways to maintain that very, very crucial relationship between child and parent. So court delays there are long gaps during proceedings sometimes in cases, and children, if it's 18 months or 2 years, which actually in England it has been, certainly over the COVID pandemic, that caused a huge amount of delays in court. And so what happens is the child kind of loses that contact and they lose confidence in seeing that parent. So that can, those long gaps can really mess up contact arrangement. New partners or blended families are also very, very difficult for children because changes in the family dynamics create anxiety or loyalty conflicts. The new partners may have other children. The children of that one parent may find that difficult, and they may be loyal to their resident parent. So it can be quite difficult and has to be handled very, very carefully. So approaches to restoring contact. It's important the child's emotional response sometimes is anxiety. They have tensions between the parents, hearing negative comments sometimes about one parent, influence willingness to attend. So sometimes children, if they have to come to a contact centre, they may be nervous about seeing a parent they haven't seen for a long time, that they are anxious that their resident parent will think they're disloyal. So important to think about those things when trying to restore contact between a parent. Gatekeeping and restrictive or protection. One parent intentionally or unintentionally limits the child's relationship with the other parent. So they try to make excuses for not letting the other parent have contact. And that is really very difficult because how do you make a parent, a resident parent, do that without trying to explain to them the benefit for the child of having a loving relationship with both of them? and limited early support. So not able to access mediation, not going to a parenting program, all of these things can actually help in restoring contact. Co-parenting help or contact centres. Sometimes when issues become entrenched, parents can't get out of that difficult and ability to talk to the try to work it out. We have something in this country called our Family Wizard, and I think it's international, and it's a co-parenting app that parents can use between them and communicate with each other. Something like that can actually help the parent to try and work out how they're going to manage this contact with the child. So approaches to restoring contact. Different services may be needed depending on the problems. So parents can be signposted to service offering parenting programs. I have in the past run parenting programs. I now do more training on parenting programs, but this is an ability for parents to understand how they communicate better, not parents, but how they communicate better with each other for the sake of the children. So other services are mediation and counselling. And we have domestic abuse perpetrator programs where somebody who's been an abuser can actually learn to behave differently around the children and the other partner. So dependent on the child's age is child inclusive mediation. We use child inclusive mediation a great deal in this country, and is one of the things that we know about it. It's a very powerful tool that a mediator who has done a mediation with a child can then go to the parents and say what the child wants. And it is a very powerful tool with the parents to understand exactly what the child is saying to the mediator. There is also counselling for a child, and also in cases where a child doesn't know there's been a long gap between seeing the parent, there is life story work that a centre or a mediator with a child to help them to get knowledge of the parent. It is not helpful, and I found this in practice, it is not helpful to force a child to have contact when they're not ready, or when there are any issues above like domestic abuse, etc., at present, until they have an opportunity to resolve them. So really important to be able to explain to a child, or for the parent where there are difficulties, if the child doesn't want to see that parent, to try parent. It's not possible at the moment. Just important that you tell the child that you love them and that you would like to see them, but you won't make them see you, but when they're ready you would like to see them. So to reassure the child that they're still loved and that you want to see them, but that you're not going to force it, because in my experience it makes the child dig their heels in much more, and it probably will not go well. There's very, very little research into the effectiveness of child contact services. NAC has not done any research. Its approach is used in restoring contact with a child. Statistically, we know that having relationships with both parents, providing it is safe, is a positive experience for children and leads to good outcomes. And research done by a number of other people does say that having a good relationship with both parents leads to positive outcomes for children. So, evaluation and service quality. So important in cases that there's case progression, that people going to contact centres, if it's supervised, that there are steps from supervised to supported and to the community. So in a supervised centre, people will be working with the parents to understand the quality of the relationship between the parent and between the non-resident parent and the child, and the safety of changing that to a supported environment where there's not so much vigilance, and in the supported environment whether then into the community. So we'll look at case progression. Safety outcomes, we'll look at safeguarding incidents, whether there have been any, and if so, how have they been resolved. We look at the child's well-being in terms of feedback and observations from the child, from the parents. We look at the parents' experience about improved and attendance at centres, and what their feedback is about how things have gone, and what they have managed to achieve in terms of moving things on. We have multi-agency input, so professional feedback from the likes of CAFCAS and courts. And also we hope that for cases that we deal with in contact centres, that there are reduced returns to court. We try to work very hard to help parents to think about other means of dealing with issues rather than going to court, because that adds to delay, it increases conflict, and it's not beneficial. In terms of operations, we have metrics, sessions delivered. We look at how many sessions are delivered and how many families are supported, and those metrics go to the government to show them how many people we deal with and are supported by. It's sometimes very difficult to monitor families, how they've moved on, because once they stage of their lives, they don't really want to look at how things used to be. They want to have moved on with their lives, and the only time we will hear about anything from them is if they have to return because there's been some kind of difficulty. But usually parents have moved on and they're getting on with their lives, and the children are being seen. The key challenges for centres is financial instability or uneven funding. So if you've got supported centres who are relying on a small amount of money from, plus something they may get from parents, but something they may get from other community groups, then that isn't always secure. So sometimes that can be a challenge. Rising demand and increasing complexity in terms of the cases. We have found that more so that cases are, there's much more domestic abuse in terms of cases. And we think that might be as a result of the new legislation for the Domestic Abuse Act, that parents have decided much more to report domestic abuse. So, and more people have got more complex needs like drug and alcohol. So those are key challenges for our centres, and are more likely to need to go to supervised centres than support. So there can be workforce and volunteer shortages. Volunteer shortages possibly is a key challenge in this, because they're not paid, and so sometimes people, instead of volunteering, may have to work, so it's very difficult. Workforce in terms of supervised centres, in terms of pay, is quite a challenge, whether they can manage to charge enough from families, and they try to down. But in supervised centres, you've got social workers, and the workforce has to be paid, so that might be difficult to be able to pay. So that creates a shortage sometimes. Fragmented local services. Again, we've got areas in the country where there aren't necessarily services because they're rural. High and varied costs for parents. Some of them are just unable to pay for contact. Um, and we're very sad about that if that means a child cannot have a contact with a parent. We've tried to find ways around that. Maybe they can do it through virtual contact, but it does limit um, parents and children, especially in supervised settings. And digital and data sharing challenges, those are quite difficult if there are people who are trying to get over what's being said online. Those are creating difficulties for parents. Innovation development, some of the things I've already said. Virtual contact is a means of being able to make sure a child can see a parent, and child contact services, which are people who go out to different areas, if it's in rural places, and those are innovations that we have done to be able to make sure that children have an opportunity to meet with parents. Best practice is in terms of compliance with standards for centres. Our accreditation system is very robust. We do have a series of spot checks if we have a concern about a centre that is not actually that we. So we will do a spot check to find out what the complaint is and to see if that centre needs our support to get to change whatever it is that the parent hasn't been happy with. Our obstacles are funding uncertainties, workforce shortages, safeguarding inconsistencies where a centre hasn't followed their safeguarding procedures, lack of multi-agency trust, conflict. These are things that recommendations we need to deal with. Premises difficulties, inconsistent operating models, poor data and tech infrastructure, low public awareness of child contact, and accessibility gaps. So our recommendations are managing a national framework early, standardizing training and accreditation and having well-trained and qualified, having very strong multi-agency partnerships, they are absolutely vital, having phased rollout with pilot centres, having clear safeguarding guidance, having consistent safeguarding practices and guidance, consistent operating procedures, robust digital systems, and community and professional engagement as much as is possible, because people are going to go out into the community and they may need help with what's out there to support them. So I think that's it from me.
Well, thank you so much. Elizabeth, thank you so much for your presentation. May we ask you a question? Is this a good time to ask you a question?
Yes, of course.
Thank you for that. May I start from asking the questions from the chat, and I will welcome some additional questions if there are any. The question number one: what strategies can be used to restore contact with the other parent in high conflict cases when a child refuses contact because of their loyalty to the resident parent? Thank you.
Right. We would ask the centre to actually spend some time with the child, going through life story work to find out what the anxieties of the child are. But I think there are things that Phil might be able to fill in on there. Did you get that question, Phil?
I did. I spotted it in the chat and I was just writing a response out, so I can go through that.
Yes, do, Billy.
It depends upon the level of complexity very often. So there are some generic tools which can be really helpful, like the pre-visit. Pre-visits are used as an opportunity to help children to understand how the service will work with them. The service will use the pre-visit to understand any worries and concerns they might have and will offer reassurance to those worries and concerns. So, for an example, a child might have a code word which will often be a very random word that the child and the centre know, but the other parent doesn't. And if the child becomes uncomfortable and needs to leave the contact session, they will be able to use that code word, which might be a verbal word, it might be a hand movement, it might be sharing a toy, which will help the staff to know that the child feels uncomfortable and that intervention's needed. There are also a range of tools and resources on the NAC website. They include stories, games, videos, information that's written directly for children about their rights, their needs, helping to normalize changes. All of those things can be really great resources for helping children to prepare for that transition. However, we also recognize that some of the children and young people that come to our contact centres, whether it be because they've experienced alienating behaviours or something else, the level of complexity is so high that they need something more specialist than typical UK contact centres can provide. That might include help from a health visitor or a doctor, or sometimes even a counsellor or a psychologist, alongside things like the child inclusive mediation that Elizabeth was talking about earlier.
Thanks, Phil. So I've got
Thank you so much. Elizabeth, did you want to add anything further? Or can we ask the
no,
next question?
I think Phil has done that. Phil has done that well.
Thank you for that. Oksana has raised a hand with the next question, but I would like to give a word of welcome to Lisa Parkson, who is our teacher, who is an honorary member of our association. Lisa, thank you for being with us today. Thank you for have supported us for the last 15 years of our practice. Thank you for your participation today. Lisa, can you hear us? Can you hear the interpretation?
Hello, sorry, I was just changing to English. My greetings to all of you.
Lisa, thank you so much. Thank you for being with us.
I'm very much with you. Every day I've just been reading the news from Ukraine. I'm with you all the time.
Thank you so much, Lisa. We'll give the floor to Oksana for her next question then. Elizabeth, thank you for your detailed presentation. My question is based on your presentation where you mentioned the term, the best interests of the child. So how do you define that?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch what. How do I define what? Sorry.
The best interests of a child.
Oh, the best interest of the child. I think it's important that at the pre-visit we understand how the child is feeling. Is there resistance by the child, and why that might be when they come to a centre? We give them an opportunity to talk to the centre coordinator, have a look at the games, etc. If the child we try to find, as Phil said, try and find out why that should be, what their anxiety is. Has it been that they haven't seen the child for long? or that haven't seen the parent for a long time, or have they witnessed some kind of disagreements or fights between the parents. Try and find out what that's about. And then try to reassure the child that the parent loves them and wants to see them. I don't think in those circumstances we would want to force a child, but we would try to encourage them to see that, because we don't always know whether the child is hearing bad things from the other parent, or just hearing phone calls that a parent has had saying bad things about the other parent. So we try to establish what reasons, and try to reassure the child that they are in a safe environment, that somebody will be there for the whole time, and that there will be an opportunity for them to have, I think Phil said earlier, a word that they can say if they are feeling uncomfortable. But we will try as much as possible to identify the reasons. And if it's just because it's a gap, or because somebody else has said something, try to reassure the child. I don't know, Phil, if you wanted to add anything to that.
Not specifically, no, other than to say we have a set of values which kind of form a starting point for any contact centre, and they are embedded within our standards. So things like, we recognise that a contact centre isn't the best place for children and young people, and therefore it should be providing a short-term stepping stone, helping them to transition to more appropriate arrangements. But we also have standards around hearing the voice of the child, ensuring that the voice of the child is recorded and reflected within contact notes, and a range of different ways for services to do that, including the pre-visits, ascertaining the voice of the child for review meetings, checking in with children in between contact sessions. So all of those things help us to understand what is important to a child and to think about how that fits into services. It's not necessarily that we will always do what the child wants, because we recognise that what the child wants might not always be within their best interests. But once the voice of the child has been heard, the professionals at the individual services will be able to make those assessments. They will also be working in a very multidisciplinary way. So, for example, families that have been through court will have had a Section 7 report, which is a report that is completed by a CAFCAS officer. A CAFCAS officer is a social worker who's employed by the government, and that report looks at the best interests of children and provides advice to the court. So where such documents exist, our standards would say that contact centres should be planning their services based around that.
Thank you so much. May I ask another question still? You've been saying that following the meetings, a report would be drafted for the parents. Will it be a report on what's been done and progress achieved? Or are these recommendations for the parents for the future? If you could go into the report drafted for the parents, we'd be very grateful.
Phil, do you want to answer that?
Yes, no problem. So the report that's written for parents only really relates to supervised contact and not supported. At a supervised contact level, which is where the level of risk is higher, as Elizabeth was saying, the staff remain within sight and sound of children at all times, and they will write a report of their observations. Now, we're always really clear to explain to people that that report is a summary of relevant observations rather than a verbatim word by word kind of transcript type report. The report often follows a specific template where they will look at emotional well-being, wishes and feelings, play and stimulation, guidance and boundaries, basic care, all of those type of things. Different centres will then have a different approach to recommendations. And it will also depend on what process is taking place outside of the centre. So, for example, where the courts are involved, the courts often like contact centres not to make recommendations because those recommendations might interfere with the recommendations that the government appointed social worker that I was talking about before might make, or recommendations that the court might put in place. Where the court's not involved, then the centre will be quite proactive in terms of giving parents feedback about how they might improve, and the recommendations that they will be making very often will either be about the appropriateness of contact and whether they are the right service for them, or helping them to take those steps to move on to more natural arrangements. And as Elizabeth was saying before, they will use things like a parenting plan in order to support them on that progression and to help those parents to feel able to do that.
Thank you so much for that. Can we wrap up, or do we have any further questions? Can we wrap up the UK block, UK section? Can I have one last question about the age, if I might? So can
Yeah.
the children self-refer to you if they're teenagers, say 13, 14, they're not small children, but the teenagers may seek to restart contact with one of the parents. So can they, and what is needed to make that happen?
Would you like me
Go
to do
for
that,
it, Phil.
Elizabeth? Yeah. There is no
Yeah.
easy way for children to refer themselves into a contact centre. We don't have the standards or the infrastructure to facilitate that to happen. One of the main reasons for that is because contact, certainly in the UK, is based around the parents consenting to engage with the service. So very often contact centres, as a way of knowing that both parents consent, they will ask both parents to complete the referral form. The referral form is quite a long, detailed document that even a teenager would struggle to put together. It really does need to be a parent or a professional that's doing that. So in brief, that no, there isn't a way in the UK at the moment that children could make referrals to contact centres.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Before we
Elizabeth,
wrap up,
Philip.
might I say it's been a privilege to meet you all. And we've put some links in the chat to the NAC website, which you're very welcome to use, the judicial protocol, a couple of other things that you might find useful, and our YouTube video that is about a child of separated parents, about the kind of things that he's had to experience through his parents' conflict. So you might just find that useful to look at. So we've put it all in the chat. You're very welcome to use it. You can contact us on the contact address if there's at any time you want to discuss anything with us. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. We're always very happy to support all the people who've been in touch with us. We have working agreements with Ukraine, with Lithuania, South Africa. So we're very happy to try and support you in any way that we can.
Dear Elizabeth, dear Philip, thank you for your presentation. Thank you for your support. Thanks for the link. We will share the materials you have shared with us. about the British network of child contact centers. Thank you very much for introducing us to your organization. We're most grateful to you for your cooperation. Thank you for signing the memorandum of understanding with us, and we are really, really looking forward to our continued cooperation. And thank you for your continued support. Dear colleagues, we are running a little bit over the time, so from 12:30 to 12 to 13:30, we had to hear about the family mediation in Australia. I would like to welcome Alex Cesaro. Thank you for joining us and supporting us in this research. Thank you for sharing the Australian family mediation, knowing how the system works from inside. Alex is a long-standing practicing family mediator. He had practiced in Ukraine, so it's my double privilege to hear Alex in Ukrainian at this conference and learning about one of the most progressive systems of handling family conflicts with a special focus on the best interest of the child. So, Alex, over to you.
Дякую, Тетяна. Вітаю, колеги. Мене чути нормально?
Так, все добре. Чуємо і
Добре.
бачимо. Угу.
Дуже дякую за запрошення. Мені дуже приємно з вами поспілкуватися. Для тих, хто зі мною не знайомий, мене звати Алекс Азаров. Я австралієць, але, як ви розумієте, в мене є зв'язки з Європою. Я народився в Москві. Ми емігрували в Австралію, коли мені було 10 років. І я був дуже радий можливості пожити в Україні, попрацювати, підтримати діалогові практики колег-медіаторів, фасилітаторів діалогів. І я повернувся до Австралії в 2021 році і змінив напрямок професійний і закінчив диплом сімейної медіації. І зараз працюю як сімейний медіатор вже майже рік, але до цього я працював з іншими конфліктами. І хотів відмітити, що я почав своє навчання якраз в Україні з Тетяною на курсах сімейної медіації. Тому це такий приємний момент сьогодні з вами поділитися досвідом. Дякую за питання. Це допомогло мені підготувати презентацію. Деякі відповіді будуть короткими, тому якщо що, записуйте свої питання, і потім ми можемо поговорити більше. Загальне питання про модель роботи контактних центрів. На початок я хотів би відмітити, що є різниця між контактними центрами в нас і загальними центрами сімейних стосунків. Бо центри сімейних стосунків – це такий хабс, про який Елизабет вам трошки розказала, що там не тільки робота, контакт з дітьми, там інші послуги. І тому в нас в Австралії акцент більше на таких загальних хабах, центрах сімейних стосунків. Як вони працюють? Вони неурядові громадські центри, які підтримують сім'ї, що мають проблеми у стосунках до або після розлучення. Вони надають інформацію, вони направляють людей в різні інші організації, Також вони надають послуги людям, такі як медіація, психологічна допомога, а також освітні програми для дорослих та дітей. Деякі організації також надають цю послугу контактних центрів під наглядом, але це тільки одна така послуга. Я можу трошки більше розказати про ці центри потім.
Алекс, я перепрошую, зачекай
Так.
хвилинку, я перевірю, чи є англійський переклад.
Добре.
Олена, скажіть, будь ласка, чи ви з нами?
Я можу говорити австралійською, але
Та я розумію, що ти можеш англійською, але питання тоді буде все рівно в перекладі для наших українських колег.
українською. Так.
Так. Олена, чи чутно мене? Світлана, чи є в нас?
Ви знаєте, вона в групі є, так, я пишу зараз, поки не відповідає, і я не чую англійського.
Okay, so we have interpretation into English. We'll
Зараз є.
continue.
Окей.
So I was talking about the contact centers. We can speak more about them, but this is only one of the services available at the family centers. There are private organizations and specialists who provide all of these services, but at higher rates. So I work in a different center. So the next question I received, how far back do these centers go? These centers were launched in Australia in 2006. However, there was work with families. For example, there's the Interlight organization, and it is going to celebrate 100th anniversary this year. And there are other organizations that were launched in 1948, in 1950s. So the support of families has existed for a long time in Australia, but these centers only went into operation relatively recently. Well, 20 years ago, well, comparatively recently. In 2006, 65 centers were launched, not simultaneously. And the turnover was over $200 million. So 15 centers were launched in 2006, then in 2007, and 25 in 2008. So currently, Australia has around 200, 250 centers. And there are around 5 national network organizations with centers throughout Australia, and 3 of them are religious related. Quite interestingly, there are a few smaller organizations, around 30 to be more specific. So overall, this gives us around 200, 250 centers funded by the government. This excludes privately funded organizations and individual practitioners. Another source of funding in Australia is the State Legal Aid Service, which provides subsidized legal aid, and there's family mediation available with participation of a lawyer, which is called legally assisted mediation. Another source of funding is culturally appropriate family mediation for the Aboriginal people, so indigenous people in Australia. They have special programs and funding available to them. And there are organizations that specialize in that. There's also another source of funding that has to do with family courts. In particular, let's say individuals get all the way to trial, but they haven't had mediation. They could be referred to court annexed mediation with court mediators. Next question. State, governmental, non-governmental bodies that are involved in funding. We have a General Prosecutor's Department, which is a key entity, and the Social Services Department. So these are the stakeholders in this area. These are two bodies that manage the funding and the system. Next, are the contact centers part of the services network? As I mentioned before, there are only 5 network type organizations. The rest are more independent. These organizations compete with one another for funding, but the cooperation does exist as well. And has existed for many years. Legal and organizational fundamentals. Are there regulatory requirements for setting up of a contact center? Well, the answer is no. There are regulations requiring specifying requirements for grant eligibility. In Australia, the funding is given by the federal government, and grant money can be used for different types of activities. For example, provided information about family relations and children's needs, assisting families with access to other services. So this could be comprehensive cases with many needs covered. Next, joint resolution of family disputes, mediation in particular, to make sure that the parties can agree about parental arrangements after divorce. There's also property-related mediation, after divorce. Next, information sessions, seminars, and awareness services. These are programs and training courses. And this all can be part of a grant. So that's what I found to illustrate the regulations. Are there the standards, professional standards developed? I haven't found anything specific, but of course, there are reporting requirements. There has to be reporting. We'll elaborate on that a bit later. Are these services mandatory? Mediation with parents is mandatory before you file a claim to family court to have an order issued on parental arrangements. However, there are some exceptions to this. For example, if there's a risk of danger, or there's a need to resolve a certain situation quickly, then the case goes to trial without mediation. And here I wanted to focus about the voluntary nature of mediation. Voluntary principle is key in mediation, and here we can distinguish between actually prompting a person to attempt mediation and voluntary consent to mediation, and recognizing the person's right to suspend mediation. We cannot force people to continue mediation, but the system that makes them try mediation statistically works well, because the difference between those who come to mediation out of their own accord and agree to participate is very low. These numbers are very low. The law on the family law implies that the parties take effort, and if the parties do not do that, this can negatively impact their case in trial. Next, the contact center services free of charge or not? The center is under obligation to provide 1 free of charge hour for mediation. Additional payment can be made depending on the income of the parents. If it's less than $50,000 per year, then the mediation will be free of charge for them. Otherwise, it's $30 per hour, which is not too much. And we'll later be talking about private mediation. And family consultations or therapy costs more, around $90 per hour, and participation in educational programs normally is free of charge or could be at low cost. Payment for the contact centers services for non-governmental centers is $50 per hour per 1 session, which is not much. For comparison, private providers can have prices for, let's say, a first session of before mediation begins could be $200, $400. This half a day long mediation, $1,000. A day long mediation could be $2,000, $5,000. So $400, $600 per hour, not $30 in comparison. So you can see this major difference. How funding is organized. The federal government announces a call for proposals and invites the organizations to submit their bids. Not all of the organizations are eligible, but the trusted organizations who have been around for a long time, they are there. There could be cooperation with the new ones, but this makes process more complicated. These grants normally cover the period of 5 years. Next, organizational structure and team. The organizational structure of the contact center. And here I'm talking about the family centers, the hubs in general. So the administrative staff, so those who meet the clients, that's tier 1. There are also consultants, psychologists. We refer to them as family counselors, family counseling, which is different from what psychologists do. They don't necessarily have a degree in psychology. There's a distinct area of expertise, counseling, which is similar to consulting, but of course, they are similar to psychologists, but they work not so much with disorders, but more with rather with coaching, psychology. So family counselors are a major part of the center's operation. And of course, there are mediators, those who specialize in dispute resolution. There are specialized programs available that work with schools, with domestic violence specialists. There are indigenous people specialists. Our organization has 10% of staff that representatives of the indigenous people, and of course HR, IT, marketing departments. So this is the organizational structure of the centers. How is the team formed? There are requirements for the specialties. Each profession has its requirements, and normally it would imply qualifications and certain level of experience. So who makes decisions? Normally there would be a selection committee, but I believe you have it the same way. HR department could be involved, a manager who's directly hiring the person. Are there professional development standards? Yes. The Prosecutor General's department uses the accreditation mechanism for family mediators, which includes a public registry, a mechanism of complaints hearing, and standard requirements for accreditation include qualifications. Most often that would be a degree. And that would require at least 6 months of training and a year of work practice. There could be different requirements, but normally that would require a degree in mediation. Next requirement, insurance of professional liability to be defended in the future. That's mandatory. And participation in complaints consideration mechanism. This is also required to make it possible for parents to lodge a complaint if needed. And next, the requirement is continuity in professional development. In 2 years' time, you would need to spend 24 hours for professional development. These could be supervisions, participation in conferences like this one, for example, mentorship, coaching, lectures, research, and practitioners report independently about that, but there could be an audit, so they would need certifying documents to confirm all that. Access to the service and working with cases. How do cases get into the contact center? A lot was mentioned already, court, social services, people bring the cases themselves. Next question, a great one. Can a child actually seek assistance from the contact center without parents' consent? It's actually quite a complicated issue. I talked about this with my colleagues. Normally, children can get access to some of the support services, and I can send you a few of the websites available, which are great, with information about Kids Helpline. Well, actually, I can send it to you in the chat. There's also a program of mental health support for the young, which is called Headspace. And children can actually contact them and receive assistance without the consent of parents. But when it comes to the centers, mediation in Australia, everything is well regulated, which is part of our identity to have everything well regulated. And it's very important for us to have parents' consent, at least one of the parents, a mother or father, to be able to work with the case. Typical journey of a case. So the requests are processed by the administrative staff. They collect information, then there could be an internal or external referral made. At this stage, basic information would normally be shared about the services, about the rights. For family mediation, normally the stages would be as follows. And the organizations can have different processes, but this is from my experience. So the initial response, and then the client waits for a month or two to have their first meeting. This is a confidential meeting, which is about an hour and a half long. So this is the first meeting with the client. Then we reach out to another involved party, a mother, father, grandmother, invite them to the process. If they consent to then this meeting is scheduled, and the second meeting is organized with the second person, and then we assess whether mediation in this case makes sense. And a lot of factors are taken into account. If it's a go for mediation, then the next would be the preparatory session with each of the parties. Normally that would be approximately an hour long, and only after that we plan for mediation itself. This could be 3-4 hours. In other organizations, this could be an hour. Private mediators normally spend an entire day working. That is different from how organizations do that. From my experience, if mediation lasts over 3 or 4 hours, people get exhausted. They start getting irritated, so it doesn't work. And then later, mediation can continue if needed, or a plan can be agreed upon, a parenting plan with respective arrangements. Then family court can be contacted to turn this plan into court's reflection of parents' consent. And if mediation fails, fully or partially, parents can request a certificate which will say that they tried mediation, it didn't help. And this is the certificate that they would take the case to court with, because it's impossible otherwise. And the approximate duration of a case from the moment when the request is received till when the mediation is over could be 2-3 months, sometimes up to 6 months. Some of the cases take longer. Family counseling can take one session or regular sessions throughout years of therapy. And parents, every 2 weeks, parents can use services at the center for up to a year. So every 2 weeks, they would have meetings with the child, and this could last up to 12 hours. And after that, we make an opening for another family. Different roles. There are mediators, there are managers who support mediators, there are supervisors, there are specialist practitioners, those who work with children, specialize in that, those who specialize in therapy, mediation. There are managers, regional managers in particular. Interdisciplinary interaction. How does this happen? Normally, the specialists communicate informally about the clients and their needs. However, there could be formal referrals from mediation to therapy, from therapy to mediation. The statistics of these referrals is compiled to illustrate that different needs of clients can be met by, for example, one organization. However, it could be the case that several organizations need to be involved to support a family. The specialists often discuss cases with their supervisor or other colleagues to obtain new knowledge or advice about resolving different issues. Some of the specialists cooperate directly, for example, family mediator and child counselor. So they cooperate in provision of a service of mediation involving children. And research shows that in most of the cases, it helps to get the best results, and this needs to be developed. Unfortunately, it's not as supported as would be needed for its development. New Zealand, if you're interested, maybe to invite New Zealand for next conference. If I'm not mistaken, in New Zealand, working with children in family mediation is a must-have. If there's no danger, threat to a child, but in Australia, it is not mandatory, and oftentimes we simply lack practitioners. And here I should probably note that in Ukraine, I know that family mediators can work with children. In Australia, family mediators cannot work with children. If said mediator does not have relevant qualifications, training, and experience. So these are two distinct, separate roles, and people cooperate in this process. Are there joint interdisciplinary meetings regarding specific cases? Normally, this would be a referral. Let's say mediator refers a case to therapy, and there's a referral form for that. And this referral form would include all the relevant information. What is the difference between a comprehensive service at one center and parallel work of different specialists? Centers have an advantage because the specialists can work with one another on the same premises, and such cooperation helps to strengthen collective knowledge, experience. And independent specialists, their advantage can be that they are not limited by policy and standards of an organization, but nonetheless, they still have to operate within the same professional boundaries. Next, how does the contact center works with cases in which clients have already engaged specialists on their side. We have examples of working with other specialists. Most often these would be family dispute resolution involving lawyers, legally assisted mediation, and family lawyers would participate and cooperate with mediators. There are different models available, but normally lawyers would be jointly working with the client and they would consult throughout the process of mediation. At times, it is better when these lawyers are there. Other times, it's the other way around. It makes the process very aggressive and not very efficient because there are different lawyers. And times there can be conflicts of interest. For example, if a practicing lawyer personally knows a client, or if a mediator personally knows a client. Organization has a policy about such situations, and in some cases, they can turn down a service, and normally they would refer a client to another organization to seek help there. Approaches to restoring contact. I'll approach it from a different perspective because one of the key problems that we have in working with families is not so much contact between parents and children, but the deep-rooted parental conflict that negatively impacts a child. So we are mostly targeting the parents and their relations to decrease this adverse impact on children. Of course, we do work with restoring rapport between children and parents. However, these are two distinct lines of work. The key theory of change is that to support families, to make them more focused on children, on the impact that they have, for them to cooperate to achieve results that are in the best interest of a child. And these we can actually talk about interest of a child. There was a great question from you about that. And this is specified in our law. There's a definition of interest of a child. A comprehensive approach is important. There could be different needs, counsel and therapy, mediation, educational programs, working with high schools, supporting victims of domestic violence. And there are also programs aimed at changing the behavior of men. Or to put it more correctly, persons applying violence, but most of them are men. Would the approaches be different depending on the reasons for worsening or loss of contact? This is similar to what the British colleagues have mentioned. For parents with low or mid level of conflict, family mediation could suffice. It could be enough to arrive at certain arrangements about custody or property. For high-level conflict parents, family mediation often turns out inefficient. Family counseling after divorce can help parents to profoundly resolve issues with their relations. This is more than mediation, and this can positively impact their relations with children and decrease that adverse impact compared as opposed to a situation of parents and conflict. In cases of domestic violence, normally that would be referral to victim support services and behavioral change programs. This could be tools for positive change. And research shows that men that have used violence in the past for them, the best motivation to change their behavior is children. When such men see that this negatively impacts their child, very often they would admit responsibility and want to change their behavior. What approaches and methods turned out to be the most efficient to establish rapport between a child and significant grown-ups? The most important is for parents to be able to switch attention from their conflict between them, to the best interest of their child. So anything that can help with that increases the likelihood of that. What approaches turned out to be inefficient? When there's high level of conflict, domestic violence, and other factors like drug and alcohol use, mental health disorders, very often these would make the most complicated cases, and the chances for positive resolutions are slim. So it's not so much about the approaches, but what the cases are. It's very hard to work with those cases, and often those cases would go to trial and it's resolved there. Do you use performance research? To be frank, I didn't have much time to find research for this presentation, but in the materials that I handed over to you, I managed to find a few examples of research about the performance of the centers. And there's some interesting information, for example, like child-inclusive mediation needs to be supported. So you can have a look at that. But there's a multidisciplinary research into child psychology, conflictology, domestic violence, and there's research into the changes of behavior of men who use violence. I think that with time I could find more studies for you, because that would be interesting to me too. So let's move on. Results and services quality assessment. How do you assess the results of the contact centers? The government funding requires reporting to be made through the centralized data exchange system for all of the organizations that receive government grants. And this is a great centralized system, and information about performance includes everything about clients, gender, date of birth, age, etc. Normally, in line with the law on privacy and confidentiality, the data would be anonymized. There's also demographic data, cultural, language diversity, disabilities, health status, etc. Then there's information about the services, how many sessions there were, number of cases, what cases, and in a resolution and not, the certificates issued. And there's also preliminary monitoring, middle of the process monitoring, and final monitoring. There are also different indicators that are looked at: the number of persons that received assistance, which makes sense. I will not dwell too much on that. And also share of clients that improved independence from conflict, improved welfare. So there are some very interesting indicators. And this is everything that's included in this assessment. Next question. Is there monitoring after the completion of a service in some time? No. But after a service had been rendered, we conduct this final monitoring. The preliminary monitoring is done during the first session to collect basic information, and then you can compare it with data at the end of the process. Normally the questions would have a scale from 1 to 5 for questions. How much do you know about the process? How confident are you in the process? How efficient have your efforts been so far to resolve a dispute? What is your mental health and well-being? How supported do you feel? How safe do you feel? Questions like that. And final monitoring would be the same questions for us to identify change. And also there are questions like, are you satisfied with the service? Do you now consider your situation better? What helped positive change in your situation? So all of the organizations have to go through this process, and this in particular helps to have the centralized statistics. Do you collect feedback from children? Yes. We actually have questionnaires for children. There are mechanisms to collect that. There would be surveys of children of respective ages. This could be used for strengthening of trust. Children can be asked to draw something. This is to help a child open up and speak about how they found the process. Challenges, innovation, and development. What are the key challenges that you face? The key challenge, and I think that might sound funny, is excessive overload. When we talked in the past, I was told that in Ukraine, there's very few cases. It's hard for mediators to find work. It's the other way around in Australia. The workload is something that increases the likelihood of burnout, pressure. Mediators can have up to 35, 50 active open cases, and they have to have, give or take, 3 sessions per day, 3 consultations, so 1 mediation per week. But in practice, it's more than 1 mediation per week. And oftentimes you work alone. But of course, it's much better to have someone in co-mediation. It's just the resources are scarce for that. If it's a complex case, of course, we try to work with a colleague. Mediators can face ethical dilemma. For example, believe that mediation doesn't make sense in this case. If clients really wish help, there's nobody else to help them but us. Next, clients with difficult needs. They might be desperate for help, but in reality, they need to seek help elsewhere, like, for example, in therapy or something else. Next, legislative, professional requirements, organizational policies, administrative systems, all of that added to the workload on the practitioners aside from the mediation itself. So most of the work time is not mediation, and this has to do with the case management particularities, e-letters, planning, payments, note taking. It's of utmost importance to take notes for reporting purposes, to make everything professional in case there are complaints later. And the same goes for the therapists. They say that at times they don't have available time because they have to take notes and keep everything in order. Do you introduce or plan to introduce innovations? Actually, here we can talk about artificial intelligence. Most attention is paid presently to integration of models like ChatGPT to automate work processes, processes of note-taking, contract drafting, for example. So everything that can help us work faster. AI can help with emails, writing of emails. However, there are serious concerns about confidentiality. Most probably, I believe organizations will be developing their internal systems based on AI to maximize data safety and data security and confidentiality. And presently, the practitioners would use the open ChatGPT without realizing that all of the client's data might be used by third parties. The COVID pandemic led to large-scale switch to online working, and it's quite interesting. We have children counseling available online at the contact center, and very often parents can, let's say, arrange to have a FaceTime call with a child, with a mother and a father. But, well, they ask for that. Many of the services are provided via Zoom presently. There's also increase in awareness about neurodivergency. I don't know if you've heard about that. For example, parents and children with autism need to have services, processes, resources adapted to make it more accessible to clients with neurodivergencies. My personal opinion is that it's not a pathology, it's just people are different with different nervous systems. They perceive things differently. And for me, it's often not so much about a person, but rather about our organization, how we can change to accommodate them better. And many children now present these neurodivergency factors. Next, what practices do you consider the best? In a nutshell, I think preventing is better than having to treat. Early intervention into family relations is important to minimize adverse impact of family conflicts on children. Next, working with children, school children can help break dysfunctionality cycles in families and provide support to parents and children to change everything as soon as possible. I can see I'm running out of time, so on to recommendations. What obstacles should we expect early into the existence of this centers in the system? Given that Ukraine already has a certain system of family mediation, the key challenge that I see is looking for ways to refer families that require such assistance to the centers. Mediation is mandatory in Australia before case can go to trial, and it can actually provide this demand for services. The next challenge for you is going to be to have a sufficient number of qualified and experienced specialists to meet the demand and to avoid the problem of excessive workload in particular. And you already have training courses for mediators, so maybe you could think about expanding them and scaling up to be prepared. Governmental funding or other funding will be important for supporting of those organizations. A successful pilot case could be helpful in lobbying for more funding. I think there could be other ideas as well. Next, suggestions and advice. Keep up the good work. Stay adaptive. Use your Ukrainian innovation and courage. And you already have a lot to teach other countries, and there will be more. Thank you. Sorry, I took too much time, probably, but I will be happy to take your questions. Thank you, Alex. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you so much for such a comprehensive presentation and answering our questions, given that we don't have time for the Australia session, but if that's okay, I would like to ask one question. I have time till morning. Yes, I know this is not our first meeting, and this is always so inspirational. Alex, I wanted to ask about the following. Given the numbers of the families that had to leave Ukraine, do you maybe have information about Ukrainians that are currently in Australia? And maybe you have information about trans-border cases, family mediation trans-border cases with these families. Well, I don't know about the trans-border cases. Of course, there's Ukrainian diaspora, and I talked to them when I lived in Melbourne, and I talked to the diaspora in Sydney. I believe that if there are such cases, they're at the local level. I mean, when they have a local partner and get divorced with them, there are definitely cases like that. Well, the only factor here is language. Often there would be interpreters, so for different languages. Well, it's an interesting question actually about cross-border cases. I think I could look into it. I'll ask around. Thank you. We appreciate that. Really, we have a lot of that cooperation going on with such countries, and mixed international organization that we've been working with refers a lot of cases where one of the parties is a foreign resident, and we work with different foreign countries. So I was wondering about your experience, whether there's cooperation between Australia and Ukraine in that. I'll ask around. Thank you. Oksana, I can see a raised hand. I actually have two questions, but probably you can take one more relevant about supervision. This is my first question. I heard that you have supervisions. Is that enough? how often does it happen? So what requests are most common for supervision case management? In our organization, formal supervision used to happen every 2 weeks. Now it's every month, once in a month, and different challenges are discussed, as well as professional cases. But of course, at any point, you can reach out to your manager and discuss an outstanding issue. And this is done every day. There are no barriers to that, but there's formal supervision as well, and everything is documented. And we can, because of that, see the professional development of a specific specialist. There are group supervisions once a month too, and this is where you can talk to your colleagues from different centers of the organization, which is quite interesting. And normally somebody would be presenting their case, a complex case, to hear out different opinions. This is not so much supervision, but rather intervision. So this is the process that we have. Thank you. One more question, if that's okay. I heard you mentioned that there's a need to take excessive notes in case there are complaints against the mediators. Have you had such complaints against mediators in your experience? Complaints do happen. This is not something critical. We anticipate clients that will be unhappy. Most often, these are unsubstantiated complaints when there are certain dilemma and we do everything right by the book, by law, and just the person doesn't like it. For example, if we, let's say, had the first session and talked to them and we see that mediation doesn't make sense in this case because there are risks, we are not under any obligation to extensively explain our reasoning. And they can be unhappy because of that and say, why I want mediation, and they can complain. But then all of our notes, everything is discussed with our manager, well, and the situation doesn't change. Of course, if a practitioner does something wrong professionally, then of course these complaints are substantiated. I had a few complaints in my practice, but they were empty, honestly. And there are a lot of clients who just enjoy having conflicts with everybody. So this is something to anticipate from them. It's not a problem for me, I can say. And what's important that there's a process for liability available. Thank you. Thank you for the meeting, for the presentation, and for the information you shared, for explaining to us how the family mediation system looks like in Australia. Thank you very much, and we will be happy to see you next time at our conferences in the future. Dear colleagues, the agenda says it's time for us to go on a break, given that we took too much time. We'll have 15 minutes for our break till 2. At 2, after the break, we'll continue and focus on Ukrainian context, and the first presentation will be by Larisa Radchenko on legal matters, and then we'll have information about our exploration of Dotyk Touch family centers cases. So 15-minute break, and we'll reconvene at 2. And let's continue. And now we have Larissa Hrenchenko with us, a mediator, a lawyer, chair of the Committee of Family Law of the Ukraine National Bar Association, with the topic of best interest of the child during wartime, from legal guarantees to their practical implementation in Ukraine. Larissa, thank you for being with us. Over to you. Thank you, dear colleagues. I hope that the security situation will allow me to deliver my presentation. And listening to the previous speeches today, I kept thinking, who am I? Am I a lawyer or am I a mediator? Because these roles are very intertwined in terms of protecting children's rights. And I believe that I'm more of a lawyer, more by 0.00%. So I will be talking about the best interest of the child during wartime from the scope of law, and I will take you along the route of practices and looking for best interests of child. Tatiana mentioned that I am a lawyer specializing in children's rights protection. And I would like to start by saying that protecting children's rights is one of the strategic objectives of state policy. And before the full-scale invasion, there was a national strategy adopted on the National Human Rights Strategy through a decree of the President of Ukraine. It was said that the rights of children have to be ensured in accordance with universally recognized international standards, and the priority is the best interest of the child, and taking them into account and hearing out of the child when making decisions. Aside from the state national policy, where else do we see the children's right protection through the scope of their best interests? Presently in Ukraine, given the challenges of the wartime, there's a national strategy for the protection of the rights of the child in the justice sector until 2028. And of course, this presentation will be made available to everyone. Maybe it would be possible to translate it for our international experts. And I have to stress that currently, at the level of child-friendly justice, there's a need recognized to take into account the best interest of the child and the views of a child. And as you can see, it's stated that there's lack of regulatory framework governing the assessment of the child's capacity to express their view, and the absence of a consistent practice of hearing the child in proceedings. And this becomes a major barrier for children's access to justice. In terms of children-friendly justice, what we mean not just only access to court. This involves administrative processes, any issues that have to do with right to education, right to access to medical aid, and in particular, notary processes and other processes that have to do with rights and interests of the child. Regarding the big breakthrough, and I'm not afraid to use this word because one of the strategic objectives of the national strategy is civil legal aspects of protecting the rights through the exercise of children's right to family in particular. And we can see that this strategic objective 4 was mentioned in the national strategy, and in line with this objective, there's an action plan which includes the specialization of judges in family disputes around children's right to family, and a number of other issues that turns caring about children from declarations to specific steps that a state is ready to take to make sure that the best interests of the child become a visualization for every child that we need to be able to see in problematic situations. The formula for a happy childhood: mankind owes to the child the best that it has to give. And I keep going back to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. I keep reminding myself of that, as well as other specialists. And I try to use this approach in any request that I, as a lawyer or a mediator, refer to different bodies and organizations protecting children's rights, or resolving children-related disputes. And unfortunately, presently, in terms of Article 3 of the Convention, the referrals sometimes happen without actually being filled with gist. But we have to remember that it's not only Article 3 of the Convention speaks of the best interest of the child. The direct references to the best interest of the child are present in Article 9 on separation from parents, Article 10, family reunification, parental responsibilities, deprivation of family environment, adoption. And what's important to stress is that the best interest of the child in the context of international standards and Ukrainian legislation cover not only civil matters, but criminal procedures as well. I mentioned that the strategy that had civil cases specified in the strategy is important, because before 2025, child-friendly justice predominantly included measures oriented at criminal procedures involving children. Ukrainian legislation recognizes ECHR's decision as the source of law and tries to stick to the concept of best interest of the child when it's in the child's interest to maintain ties with the family, except in cases where the family is particularly unfit or dysfunctional. And the second approach is that it is in the child's best interest to ensure their development in a safe, stable, and secure environment that is not dysfunctional. The Constitution of Ukraine does not have a clear-cut definition of the best interest of the child, but we can see it throughout different provisions that recognize a human being as the highest social value. And the realization is in the right to social protection, state protection of the family, childhood, motherhood, and fatherhood. The Constitution guarantees equality of children in their rights, protection of their rights by the courts, and there are legal guarantees of protection through free legal aid. Family Code of Ukraine, one of the codified pieces of legislation that specifies the right of a child to have their interest taken into account while resolving family-related issues. And we can see that it's the family code that is one of the first that actually specified convention as a roadmap or a standard to take into account while protecting children's rights. We can see provisions that specify that parents shall exercise their rights with observance of children's best interest, and we can have a provision specifying that the child shall be heard out on matters that have to do with the child themselves or their family life. As I've mentioned in the beginning, it's not only the presidential decree, the national strategies define the priority of childhood and protecting of childhood in Ukraine as one of the key in the country. We can see a specialized law, the law on childhood protection, which actually defines an approach to protecting children's rights and protecting childhood in Ukraine to protect the child's best interest and the child's safety and their growing up in family environment are included in the system of measures aimed at protecting childhood and are certain guarantees of a happy childhood. And looking at international standards, the Ukrainian law on protection of childhood actually gets more specific on protecting the best interest of the child. And we can see certain elements that are present in the very definition. So what are the best interests of the child? The age, the gender, health status, particularities of development, etc. And what is a must-have? Taken into consideration a child's views when they are at the level of age of development, but they can express it. It's important to remember that neither the convention nor the law on protection of childhood have a minimum requirement or threshold at which we can start hearing out the children. So presently we can have a child be heard out starting from the age of 10, and this is confirmed by court cases. In some cases, it's starting 14 years of age, and this requires parents' consent, for example. And in practice, there are many cases where the child was asked to express their views, and when the children were younger than 10 years of age. On the approaches and the law on protection of childhood, I want to say that one of the key areas is social services, and my colleagues that will speak after me will give you more details about the Ukrainian context and practices. I would like to emphasize that the law on social services is actually oriented at the best interest of the child, and we can actually see that in the regulations that cover the custody and child care bodies, as well as the procedure for when a child is in a difficult family environment. The divorced parents is a situation that heightens the risk for a child of unfavorable family environment. And recognizing this at the level of the law shows the preventive approach of the state to protect the best interest of the state. And only if this doesn't work to take action, because the action afterwards is less efficient. Aside from the legislation, and of course, I could go on talk about that for a very long time, but I only have 20 minutes, which is a challenge to use 20 minutes to say as much as possible about the legislation. But I would like to say that Ukrainian legislation, similar to other legal frameworks, is something that we cannot expect perfection from, because family relations are so dynamic, especially in wartime, that this process of improving legislation keeps on going, because we will try to have the best standards of protecting child's best interest in the laws. And one of the tools that Ukraine has, and it's with the principle of protecting of the best interest of the child, are the courts. And I would like to speak of the Supreme Court approach that recognizes a child as the most vulnerable entity in a conflict. And the Supreme Court specifies that it's not only about a conflict between the parents, and the result of the case needs to be aimed at protecting the best interests of the child. So in terms of what the best interests of the child are, what is implied here? Again, one of the resolutions by the Supreme Court, and this is actually from wartime, from full-scale invasion duration. The Supreme Court instructs the courts and the parties and officers of law to, first and foremost, take into account the specific circumstances of the case. And we need to actualize the best interest of the child, not just abstractly referring to the standards, but we need in practice to look into the child's views. We need to take care of preserving the favorable family environments, etc. And in terms of the challenges of the wartime, I find this conference very useful, and I'm very grateful for the invitation to speak about Ukrainian experience, because in terms of child-friendly justice, I want to emphasize the key principles of child-friendly justice that are actually a roadmap pointed to the need for interdisciplinary approach in children's rights protection. And it's about a comprehensive approach of all of the stakeholders, of all the entities involved in child protection. And it's not only about legal matters and protection, but it's also about social protection and economic interests of a child, their psychological well-being. And each of these elements needs to be supported and provided by relevant specialists. And it's both about psychologists, social workers, case management. So indeed, this is an interdisciplinary issue, a matter of interdisciplinary cooperation. The principle of dignity and treating a child as an independent entity is something that needs to be emphasized. Given what we have now, can we state that we are ready to provide for the best interest of the child? We need improvement of knowledge. We need new knowledge because we need to have a command of the language to talk to a child. And this is not only a requirement for mediators, psychologists. We can see that through guiding principles of child-friendly justice, this requirement extrapolates to lawyers, police officers, judges. So the matter of specialization in children's rights is as relevant as ever for Ukraine. And regarding safety, I took upon myself to identify the best interests of the child and decision-making about evacuation from combat area adjacent regions. The parliament passed a law that already entered into force, and we are awaiting the government to draft bylaws and regulations. But at the same time, there are public discussions about whether evacuation of a child by mandatory removal from parents is in line with the best interest of the child. And we've seen a lot of different opinions, but we can see this competition between the safety as priority and the right to family environment. So I think we need to analyze all of the elements of the best interest of the child as present in the convention in Ukrainian legislation. So I would like to focus on the following. When we talk about child safety and we speak about this element as pertains to a specific child, of course, this is an absolute priority. The key objective in times of war is to survive. So we have to assess the risks of shell and air strikes, explosions, injuries, access to bomb shelters, possibility of rapid evacuation. We need to assess risk of violence or loss of adult caregiver. When we assess a family and preservation of family ties, first and foremost, we need to assess whether it is possible to evacuate the child together with parents or legal guardians. Where this is not possible, there needs to be an accompaniment by a trusted person, a competent services entrusted by the state to protect children's rights. The purpose is to prevent unsubstantiated separation from parents. When we talk about individual needs of a child, we need to remember that these includes medical needs, including checking for chronic conditions, access to treatment. There could be children with conditions for which a pause in taking medication could have drastic results. We need to remember about nutrition, hygiene, sleep, warm clothing. So the basic needs, basic guarantees, this is something that we need to take into account in the context of assessing of individual needs. And of course, the specific circumstances, disability, need for specialized care, the tender age, for example, when it's children younger than 3, children could be still dependent on nursing. So this is very sensitive in terms of evacuation. And of course, we have elements of emotional state and resilience. We need to remember that a child is experiencing fear and anxiety. And then it's a matter of a psychologist context, who helps the child adjust to the change. It's very important. So how do we verify these threats to life and health? Let's say we identify the elements that are key for providing of the best interest of the child. So what would be the evidence? So what is something tangible that can help the specialist? So this could be official information on hostilities and the intensity of airstrikes and shelling. This could be information from military administrations and emergency services, police. This is assessment of living conditions. Next, documents, information from social services, information about guardianship. Next, possibility for the family to evacuate together. For this, the relevant issues are transport, logistics, willingness of parents or guardians. Next, availability of a safe destination, how safe it's going to be and where this destination is, whether there is accommodation, food, medical care, and who would be ready to accommodate a child and child's health condition. This is about medical element and of course psycho-emotional condition. So if we were to analyze these 5 elements that I focused on, and this is quite relative, this is not an algorithm, but this is something that shows the priorities. So the priority is survival, physical safety, preserving family types, caring about mental condition and stabilization of living conditions. So every decision involving a child, about a child, needs to have those priorities taken into consideration. The changes in one of those factors affects the priority level of these elements. And to conclude, I have a few practical recommendations on identifying and assessing the best interest of the child that I've been using in my practice. The assessment needs to use a comprehensive approach and including not only safety factors, but family types, ties, educational needs, and other relevant aspects. We need to take the child's views into account, but do not treat them as the sole factor, because at times, child's views can speak of a choice that could be detrimental to a child, and such decision can be has to be explained. We need to verify information from multiple sources, and in the context of circumstances I mentioned where these findings, information can be received as well as documents. We need to document our own observations and conclusions. What's important is to clearly distinguish between facts, the child's statements, and specialist conclusions, because at times we can replace the actual circumstances with assumptions of our experience, and this can distort the genuine assessment of child's interest. I can see we have Oksana Melnichenko, a wonderful colleague of ours, and I remember at the meeting of family mediators, she once said that you need to catch up with somebody and do good to them. And you can see this is actually fundamental for protecting the principles of child's best interest. So we must not do harm. The assistance must be minimal, enough for safety and protection, but not excessive. And what we need to remember that the circumstances can change, especially in crisis, during migration and war. So assessment needs to be regularly reviewed. Dear colleagues, thank you very much. I understand that I took 5 more minutes that I had, but thank you very much for your attention. I will be happy to take those. Larissa, thank you very much. Thank you for this very useful information and legal aspects that we need to take into consideration in our practice. Thank you very much. I don't see any questions in the chat, so I think we can move on. And now we have Vera Iskovich, co-founder of Dotyk Touch Family Center, our colleague, mediator. And her presentation is on between the ideal and reality, and new legislation on the best interest of the child and the challenges in its implementation about social services. Vera. Thank you, Tatiana. I First of all, I would like to ask whether you can see my slides. Yes, we can. And I would like to start my presentation by a confession. Having talked extensively to social workers, I have immense respect for what they do daily. They have very hard work, and it's very important for children, parents, communities, but it lays foundation for support, for cooperation. And regarding the topic for today, the best interest of the child starts with recognizing the child as a rights holder, because in the work of social services and routinely at times a child is seen as an object that needs to be provided with food, clothes, housing. And this approach runs contrary to the principle of the best interest of the child. The best interests imply that the child is a subject with their right, their voice, and these rights and voice need to be heard and taken into account. And when the child is seen just as an object, decision is made for the child, and this runs contrary to the Convention on Children's Rights and contrary to the Ukrainian legislation. So who needs to provide those best interests? First and foremost, this would be parents. And parents in most situations truly try to do that and take care of the children. But the question is, what do you do if due to various circumstances, especially now, when there is war going on, the parents themselves lost the strength and they're having a hard time taking care of their child, let alone providing for their best interest. Then it's the government that needs to pick up. And the new law on social services in a preamble actually says that the law defines key organizational, legal fundamentals of social services aimed at preventing difficult life conditions, overcoming or mitigating the negative impacts to persons or families in difficult family situations. And this approach in the law is a good thing in and of itself. For a person experiencing difficult family situation, there's a lot of stress, and such a person feels they are unable to cope with it. And this might lead to learned helplessness, and they might have a hard time seeking medical aid in, let's say, one organization, counseling somewhere else, organizing children's education in a third location, even though all of the services are present within the community. And the experience that my colleague Oksana will be speaking about led us to the conclusion that a multidisciplinary approach is exactly what can provide and protect, hold the best interest of the child and family, because it is impossible to help a child if you don't help the parent, especially if it's a very young age where they aren't yet capable to care about themselves, even at the minimum. The new law on social services was adopted in 2019, And we had the pandemic in 2020 after that, and then the full-scale invasion started. And despite these huge challenges, the work still continues, and the new law has been changed. It was amended to adapt to new circumstances. So what the law did, it systematized and expanded the very concept of the services, and switched it from auxiliary function to a full-fledged tool of social policy, introduced the principles of availability and the best interest of the child, introduced mechanisms for registration of service providers in the United Information System, and assigned to local communities both responsibilities and the authority to organize their own system of social services. So the law of 2019 took a step from a narrow institutional model to something more broad and individual oriented. The list of basic services that appears in the law is useful for the concept of the best interest of the child, because it covers the most relevant issues, the psychological support, inclusive assistance, etc. At the same time, the communities see this list as a formal minimum that needs to be provided rather than a tool for the best interest of the child. And social workers in a community at times find themselves out in a situation when their work is pinned down to maintaining registers, drafting reports, managing records of the protected categories of people. This is important, but this takes so much work time that very little time is left for individual work with people, for supporting families in problematic family situations. And a social worker is turned into an administrator that has to perform too many functions. This is a major risk, and this is that discrepancy that we used as a topic for my presentation. On paper, we have great tools that are very hard to arrange in practice empirically when the specialist has no time, doesn't have access to psychologists or lawyers. In such a case, these new tools, it's impossible to use those new tools. We as mediators really love the law on social services because it actually introduced mediation in the law before the law on mediation was adopted in Ukraine. And actually, as of now, we already have this distinction between representation of interest, intermediary work, and mediation. These are two distinct standards, so a lot has been done. This is a major development, and mediation was introduced as a separate social services. And this happened because of the realization how important it is to support families and communities in difficult situations and circumstances. At the same time, when it comes to the actual introduction of the standard in practice, we see that when it comes to the trained specialists, trained mediators, there are very few in the communities. And so far, the government hasn't been able to organize that training by far and large. That is why the School of Mediation, in cooperation with the Volontaire Union, with Dnipro League, with support of the international donors, came up with the initiative to train social workers. And there was a comprehensive training conducted that included the training of basic mediation skills, family mediation training, and child inclusive mediation training. And this made it possible for at least some of the communities to obtain specialists capable of providing the qualified mediation services. However, the question arose of this conflict of roles, and very rarely the communities would have many social workers, one of which would be a mediator. Mediator as a title is non-existent in the job description document. So when a social worker mediation that doubles as a mediator, let's say identifies a case, drafts a plan for the family in difficult circumstances, and then it's them who has to mediate because there's nobody to refer the case to, then it becomes very complicated for that specialist because these are different roles. So support and assistance to the family and mediation. And it's also difficult for a family because they're having a hard time understanding which hat the person is wearing at a given moment of time. And now, in terms of mediation as social service, we have to mention the Mediators League of Ukraine, which, with help of memoranda that Tatiana talked about in the beginning, actually covers a lot of cases that social services bring. And we can see that social services work well in communities where there are mobile interdisciplinary teams where social worker, a lawyer, etc. work together. There are communities where a single-stop shop principle is used. So when a person comes to a social services center, and this is where they can get different types of aid. Resilience centers are a good initiative. They provide a comprehensive list of services, but they are available in a very limited number of territorial communities in Ukraine. And our initiative, our family center, Dotyk, can be seen as an example of how civil society sector responds to this lack of resources in the state and the government's inability to provide the support to families in stress during wartime. So bottom line is there's a tension between the ideal and reality, but it's precisely this tension that shows where the greatest efforts are needed. And this reform that is still moving, that is still more declarable, more of a declaration, can be transformed into tangible change in communities. So that was my presentation, and my colleague will continue. Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. And now let's look at the family center, Dotyk Family Center cases. Oksana Tesla, family mediator, will take the floor. Thank you. I can see we're running out of time. Not too fast because we have interpretation taking place. Okay. So, regarding the present situation, we have a few stages that are covered in our study. And the first one covers 2023, 2024. A lot of mediators were engaged from all over in Ukraine. And a lot of requests were processed during that period. And this was when we wanted to identify what needs people have, what is happening. So we organized online communication, given that it's hard to meet offline. And we realized that it's very important to focus on improving contact between parents and children. And we started the second stage in 2024. Dotyk Family Center was founded, and we did an in-depth analysis with our cases, our co-founders' cases, and we looked at the impact of related professionals. We looked at wartime context and their correlation with conflicts in families and sustainability of outcomes. So what we saw based on our first study is that it's easy for people to reach agreement about some requests like money, etc. And we focused on communication, only 13% in 23-24, and in the second stage, 100% were about communication between parents and children. We can see on this slide who actually asks for mediation. In most of the cases, that's a mother, of course, but often it would be a father, and 5.4%. This was when the request was made by a child. And we actually allow receiving requests from children. Of course, it's the children over the age of 14. Most of them are 16 that are about to enter universities, and they have situations where there are problems with communication between children and parents. And actually, it's nice to see that children know about mediation as an option, and they resort to it to improve situation in their family and to improve their well-being. And actually, there were requests from child mediators, which shows immense trust in mediation, which was very nice to see. And I would like to elaborate on this information a little bit more. Alex talked about potentially doing work online. That it's hard to imagine that. We actually do a lot of things online, and we have memorandums with partners. And when we conclude memorandums, we actually specify the possible options of having that on their side of their premises. So we actually by analyzing our cases, identified that in most of the cases, in 42.9, there were problems with the contact with the father, in 14.3 with the mother, but in 42.9, the contact was declared as sufficient. So there's enough contact, like they live on the same territory, the same premises, but the communication is what's the problem. There are conflicts. So we decided to focus on how the factor of war impacts the situation. And we can see that first and foremost, this is geographic separation. In most cases, this would be a mother with children relocate into either another country or another region of Ukraine, and then it becomes harder for a child to stay in touch with the other parent. And 14.3% are the situation when a father is military especially if a father is in the military since 2022, with children seeing their father only a few times a year. This is bad for the contact, and this is where the conflicts start, where there are fears about rebuilding trust and restoring contact. And we also noticed that there's a situation when the fathers avoid drafting and mobilizations, the conflicts start in the family, which leads to deterioration of contact and communication between parents and children. So these three factors are over 40%, but the rest, we understand that since 2022, we've been living in a new reality, regardless of whether it's in Ukraine or in another country, and we did not study the impact on that on families, because we already live in this reality. So what we saw, that not all of the cases, there's real de facto opportunity to communicate in 16.1% of the cases. One of the parents is in the military. There's physically no opportunity to, let's say, connect online at a given time or make video calls. So this also leads to such a problematic situation. Building on that about the military. So we noticed that if one of the parties is in the military or war veteran, the success rate of the case goes down. Success rate is restoring rapport, parents and children communicating again, hearing each other out, and children's interests mattering again and being taken into account by the parents. And in other cases, success rate is higher. In cases with military or veterans, the rate is lower, which presents a challenge for working, because that party would normally be physically absent. It's impossible to arrange meetings because of that, or they can have injuries or PTSD, and mediator alone is not enough. Psychologists and therapists would be required in such cases. And we looked in detail into what specialists would be engaged. In most cases, it would be lawyers, 21.4 cases, psychologists 14.3 and 7.1. Other professionals, usually those were employees of the social services who referred the cases to us, and those who were case managers handing over the cases to us as mediators, and then there would be exchange of information about further support. So when the professionals were engaged, we noticed that when psychologists were engaged, the success rate of such cases was 75%. So the report was improved. When a lawyer is engaged, the success rate was 17%, and 17% were the cases when lawyers at the same time were certified mediators. Those that we cooperate with talk to one another. We refer people to them, and they refer people to us. And what we saw is that when there's an outside lawyer, unfortunately, the impact is that parties at times leave mediation because they see better options of protecting their interests in court, and unfortunately, it becomes impossible for them to hear out their child's views. The good situation with psychologists indeed is something that we noticed, but however, there were situations when a psychologist would actually lead to the continuation of a case, because one party would engage another psychologist to talk to a child, and then second psychologist would present their findings, and then the other party, the other parent, will say that the first party negatively impacts the child is experiencing stress, the psychologist confirmed that, so we stop. They ask to stop. So we see that it's important to act together when lawyers, psychologists, and mediators come together in a case centered around the child's interests to hear the child out. And the model of multidisciplinary interaction implies that different specialists come together to tackle a situation of a lost contact, lost report. And this is where mediation, psychology, legal aid, social work come together. And I can see I have a little bit of time. I'd like to focus on practical lessons learned and conclusions based on 2 of our studies, and the third one is still ongoing. The introduction of interdisciplinary approach with this golden triangle, with mediator being neutral, psychologist representing emotional safety, and a lawyer representing legal stability. Also, a trauma-informed approach. Another thing that we uphold. This is goes without saying. There has to be flexibility. Also, flexibility over formalism. We adjust to the situation that we have, and this goes for situations when we need to decide how to best arrange a meeting, how to meet, because it serves the purpose of better communication between children and parents. And supervisions, as we've seen from our experience, have a very positive impact on mediators themselves, because this gives them more resource to continue working. And a key finding: we cannot change the circumstances, but we can change how the child is experiencing those circumstances. Thank you. So there's a little bit of information about us here in this presentation, and it will be made available. Thank you very much, Oksana. I can see a message from Elizabeth informing us that unfortunately she had to leave the chat, but thank you for joining us. Dear colleagues, if you have questions, comments, or maybe you would like to turn your mic on and say something before we wrap up, that would be great. If that's okay, I would like to say that if we fail to answer someone's question, we can always do that on the Instagram, Facebook, and stories. So don't think that this ends here. No. We are out there. We will be there. We're present. Thank you. Of course, we will send the materials of the conference to everyone, as well as presentations, different links that our presenters shared with us. Katerina? Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Unfortunately, I wasn't present throughout the entire conference, but I will be looking forward to the recording. I would like to thank our speakers and organizers for the event, for the issues that were raised, because it is of the utmost importance to talk and to take into account the best interest of the child in mediators practices and in education. As a person that is wearing several hats due to my professional responsibilities, I would like to speak as an educator, not a single curricula for training lawyers. In international law, law enforcement does not give account to child's interest. And I know there are a lot of lawyers listening to us. Family law as a subject is no longer a mandatory subject for Ukrainian lawyers. This is an optional subject for bachelor's degree program. So the interests of the child are not taken into consideration in training in curricula. So that is why your role is invaluable. And I would like to suggest something to the organizers to spread this information. Since this is an international conference, maybe we can make it more academic and maybe have compilation of key points, for example, available digitally, maybe posted at the Dotyk Family Center website for as many people as possible to be able to use that, to spread it further, to spread Ukrainian experience. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Katerina. Thank you for your comment. And indeed, we plan to actually shape that into a research. So that is why we are having this conference here, and that is why we are bringing together international expertise in Ukrainian context, and we are very much looking forward to asking our international colleagues for their suggestions about how to best do it in terms of interdisciplinary work within contact centers. So we've had major support from our colleagues, Elizabeth, Philip, and Alex. We are very grateful for your support. So we heard about your experience, and we'll continue talking to other international partners that have contact centers and family mediation. So we will look at their experience to make the practices common in Ukraine with consideration to Ukrainian experience. Thank you, dear colleagues. In the chat, there's a reference to the feedback form. Please fill out the feedback form, and we will be sending this feedback form to your registration emails. And I can see that we have 3 more minutes left, so we are very much on time. And we looked at almost everything that we had on the agenda, aside from the questions that were not asked. Philip, you can unmute yourself. I can give you the floor.
Was that somebody wanted to ask me a question?
We wanted to give you the floor to say something.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah, my comment in the chat there was just saying thank you for inviting us. It's been lovely to come here to engage, but more so to listen about what's going on in Ukraine and your colleague in Australia. I think that it's utterly inspiring that you're managing to do so much, and hearing about how your government is implementing laws that are putting children front and center really surprised me, because I thought that a lot of your resources would be focused on less positive things at the moment. So it's been lovely to be here, and I've learnt a lot from listening to you all.
Thank you very much, Christina. I would also like to thank you because all of the events you've been organizing are invaluable. And first and foremost, they are valuable because of the examples of experience that you've been collecting, picking them